You're listening to Interzone Pod. My name is Gareth Jelly. I'm the editor of Interzone and its online sister zine, Interzone Digital. Subscribe to Interzone at interzone.press and read stories for free at interzone.digital. Joining me on the show today is Interzone's very own Nick Lowe to talk about 2024 in SFF film, the awards season, screenplays, and more. You can read Nick's Mutant Popcorn film reviews in every issue of Interzone, and Interzone patrons can explore the entire Mutant Popcorn archive, approaching 700,000 words and over 1,000 films reviewed, online at Interzone Digital. Hello, Nick. It's great to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming on today.
Fantastic, Gareth. No, great to be doing this again.
Today we're doing something similar to what we did last year, which is around I think the same time of year, where we're going to be looking back a little bit at 2024, and we're going to talk a bit about screenplays and specifically kind of screenplays last year, and also sort of maybe a little bit about screenplays and reading screenplays. And then at the end, see where we are and see what's coming next. And I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic, because this is the perfect time of year to be doing this, where we can still remember 2024 and before the apocalypse, but we are also at this in this state of not yet radically disappointed optimism about all the stuff that's coming out this year, and we're in the middle of awards season, which is partly about picking out the stuff from last year that's going to last, but also is a very exciting time for me, especially because it's when all the studios post all their optimistically pushed potential nominated screenplays, and I just love reading screenplays, and so it's an opportunity really to talk about something we've been thinking about having a conversation about for a while now, about screenplays as distinct from films, as the kind of thing that I think especially Interzone people would be reassured by, that actually you can read a film and possibly get more out of it than when you watch it.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Starting with 2024, what was sort of some of the highlights for you, and also were there any films you were expecting to be a lot better than they actually were?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, I mean, I thought Dune Part 2 would be good for a start. And a lot of people seem to have been very on board with it. But, that was the thing we were massively looking forward to this year. And for anyone who loves the novel, the way that it chose to deal with the final chapters, I think, was a massive disappointment. I mean, there's amazing filmmaking in it, but you can feel it kind of jumping the rails of Herbert's narrative in ways that seem to kind of lean into what, for want of a better way of putting it, would be kind of actor-driven, character-driven fanfic, rather than actually following through on Herbert's concepts. I mean, now that the Dune Messiah film is now confirmed as Villeneuve's next, it's really hard to see how he's going to make that work. I mean, Dune Messiah is not an easy. It's not a very cinematic narrative. It's very the entire point of the book is that it's not at all the kind of jolly Campbellian messianic follow through that the first novel's fans were hoping for, and it's a very downbeat, restrained, enclosed deconstruction of everything that made the first film good. And I don't see how they're going to do that without without Chani on board to kind of spoil the end of Dune Part 2. So I was that was an earlier disappointment. But a lot of the stuff that came out early in the year was things that I think we'd covered at the end of 2023. So, I mean, 2024 was when we got to see some absolutely stunning things like Poor Things, only came out in most of the world in January. That was a cracking film. Still only 37% as good as the book, but 37% of Poor Things is pretty good. We had The Beast, which still I watched again the other day and is still a completely extraordinary film.
There's one sequence in particular you mentioned in The Beast.
Well, the sequence that lingers in the mind. I mean, so a lot of people may not have seen this. It only came out quite recently on Blu-ray. But this is Bertrand Bonello's film, one of two French films from 2023, both based on the same Henry James novella, The Beast in the Jungle, which is the story about this couple who never quite get it together because of a kind of terror of something dreadful happening. And what Bonello's film does is extend it across multiple lives. And you've got this doomed romance in three different epochs, past, near present, and or period, recent past, pre-pandemic past, and future. And there's a slightly shonky frame to it in which future Léa Seydoux is having to go, is a great premise. She's in a world governed by AI, which is in control of whether humans are allowed to make decisions or have jobs, and it screens humans for their ability to make AI-like unemotional decisions, and only 20% of humanity is employed. And if you want to get a job, if you don't want to be a kind of drone in this world, you have to go through this sort of Scientology-like process. And this is the slightly shonky bit of having your past life trauma erased. And the past life stuff is a bit of a kind of device. But so Seydoux's character goes through who has this kind of Henry James terror of some unnameable thing that she has a premonition of about to happen in her future. And it turns out that this is seeded through things that have happened in past lives. And there's one, and there are, so she has this whole series of these because the treatment fails, and he keeps having to reiterate it. And the first one is set in the Paris floods of 1910, and which has not been much filmed, but is an absolutely sensational backdrop to anything, and culminates in this sequence with George Mackay, who's the playing the sort of doomed partner in this, in a 1910 doll factory at the moment when doll manufacture is moving from porcelain to celluloid. And there's almost nothing I can say about this sequence which would not be a spoiler, but the technological crossroads is also a crossroads in for the insurance industry, let me put it like that, because of the properties of materials. And there's this 15-minute sequence at the end of the first hour of the film, after which it turns into a completely different genre, equally brilliant, with some absolutely stunning moments for the remaining sort of hour and a half. Actually visits another life, but this is the culmination of the first half, and it's one of the most extraordinary sequences you'll ever see anywhere. It goes somewhere which seems inevitable in hindsight, and the whole film is just I mean, Bonello has a bit of an obsession with dolls in his earlier work, and that I think is where it comes from. But the whole film is just unlike anything you'll ever see, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's I mean, it was technically a 2023 film, but it came out in the rest of the world early 24, and still one of the absolute highlights of the year, I thought.
Okay, The Beast. What was the other one based on the novella? I can't remember.
It was called The Beast in the Jungle, and it's never. I haven't seen it. It hasn't had an international distribution, but again, it was a kind of contemporary set, reinvention rather than the kind of straight adaptation. We started this by actually talking about the highlights of the year, didn't we? And I'm still in 2023 mode because 2023 was such an extraordinary year. But I mean, it has actually been a pretty good year. I was just looking back through some of the moments that have made me just vibrate with excitement, and probably many people's film of the year was I Saw the TV Glow, which in any year I think would be a film of the year, and not least in the way that it kind of talks about our relationship with the objects of our fandoms, even though that's not even primarily what it's about. But I thought that was one for the ages. But just looking back over the year, I was thinking, it was the year that Coppola got to make Megalopolis finally. It was the maddest film in history, but my God, there is so much filmmaking on display there that the fact that it's kind of lost the plot somewhere in the 40 years of development, in a way kind of enhances the whole experience. I mean, it's, there are not many moments in it where you want to take your eyes off the screen, although there are also many moments in where you want to just cover your eyes and your ears. I was thinking back to Sasquatch Sunset, a film that I think was leaking out. There were reports, reviews of it leaking out from festivals. I can't remember where it premiered. Was it a Toronto one? And it sounded a bit niche, but everyone who's seen it falls in love with it, and actually it stays with you. This, I think, a film which really has kind of hit its moment, despite being a completely unmakeable proposition. But it's just dealing with things that are so resonant with the times. This was the year of two Lanthimoses, of course. We had Kinds of Kindness as well, showing that he's still got the old Lanthimos despite sort of having this alternate career as a studio filmmaker. A film that really stood out for me was The End. It still seems extraordinary that I can say these words. The Joshua Oppenheimer musical, the science fiction musical from the legendary documentarist who made The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence. The third part of the trilogy is an SF musical set in an oligarch's bunker 25 years after the end of the world, and it's absolutely thematically of a piece with the two documentaries about the Filipino dictatorship and their death squads. We had looking back again. I mean, we had Furiosa, which probably will be the last Mad Max film, but was a great way to go out. Didn't really kind of set the box office alight, but I think it will, I mean, it's already, I think, established itself as one of the great action films, completely different from Fury Road in all kinds of ways, but one of the great action films of the era. Hundreds of Beavers. Remember Hundreds of Beavers? Did you ever see that? I mean, that was the Barking Man.
Yeah, your review of that one was wonderful, and I haven't had a chance to see it yet, but I'm waiting for it.
Well, everyone who sees it carries it around for the rest of their life. I mean, it's not it's not like anything else you've ever seen. And for those just tuning in, this is the I can't even describe it. It's the black and white live action. Basically kind of Looney Tunes cartoon about a fur trapper, a very amateur fur trapper, gradually learning how to develop a sort of a wily coyote, a relationship with the wilderness and its resources in settler northwest US in the 19th century, and it's just all the animals who would be cartoons in a cartoon reality are played by actors in full-size mascot costumes. There's no way you can describe it without seeing it, but it sustains it for 2 hours and gets seriously science fictional at the end in a truly bonkers way. Can I just? I mean, if I'm just reeling off the list: Sanatorium at the Sign of the Hourglass, the Quay brothers back again doing Bruno Schultz, at feature length, Schultz's greatest story, I think. Took them, I think, something like 19 years to make it. A combination of live action. The live action was shot 20 years ago, and they just sort of did little bits of stop motion when they had little bits of budget coming available.
And Street of Crocodiles was one of your very first, I think it was in the second or third, I forget. It was one of the very early kind of Mutant Popcorn reviews was Street of Crocodiles.
Yeah, and it's it's a film which has only grown in stature since. At the time, we'd never seen anything like it. It was so kind of I mean, it really looked like one of these things that you see at little compilations of animated shorts in festivals that are attended by three guys and a dog, and all the filmmakers watching one another's shorts. But it really took off, and it was massively influential in the video era. And they're still around, and they've been obviously they have made other stuff in between, but they've always had this thing for shorts, and it's a very strange kind of chemistry, because they don't do a literal translation of the narrative, although it actually, this is kind of closer to the story than Street of Crocodiles was, but it's they've still got it. It's an incredible film. Last time we were talking, I think we were very we were guardedly excited about Here, the Zemeckis adaptation of the Richard Maguire novel, which, as we I think suspected at the time, had stripped back the SF elements, which are obviously fundamental to how the book works, and the film has not done terribly well, but it is still inventing, as Zemeckis has done several times over his career, a new kind of filmmaking. This is the first film really to use AI technology for good, or at least for something meaningful in the way that it's kind of de-aged and sometimes aged up its cast to be able to do one of these lifetime plus spanning SF plots with the same actors. And the exciting thing about it when you see it is the way that Tom Hanks, who of course has he's done stuff like this before. I'm thinking of Cloud Atlas in particular, where he was kind of doing multiple roles across this vast timeline. But he was also, in this film, you get to see Tom Hanks playing Tom Hanks at different points in his life. And because there's so much footage of him at these different ages, he looks quite convincing. But there was a lot of acting going on in 60-something Tom Hanks playing teenage Tom Hanks. So that was a really interesting film. Terrible script, absolutely. You can see it loves the book for all the wrong reasons, but still worth seeing. And I think we were also talking about Kalki 2898 AD.
I just had the tab open. That was just there. In fact, I was about to say, I hope he mentions Kalki 2898.
2898, yeah. Very specific. Maybe I don't know what the sequels are titled. Maybe we get to 3000 AD by the end of the trilogy. But so great to see Telugu cinema colonizing the world with the IMAX sequel to the Mahabharata. Completely here for that. So a year of a lot of junk, but a lot of fantastic stuff. And the column in the issue that came out, which I think is my 40th anniversary in post, and I celebrated by initially trying to do 40 films, although it grew to 43 by the end. I had all the kind of festival roundup from the end of the year, so there's stuff that's still coming out in 2025 that I think is worth being excited for, and we may get a chance to talk about that as well later.
Yeah. Some of the kind of big franchise films, like there was a big Marvel one. There was the Deadpool Wolverine, and there was the Alien Romulus, which I don't think you liked, but you had some nice things to say about it. Like what was 2024 like for you in terms of kind of franchise films? Were there any that kind of stood out as being, good, but or better than you maybe had thought they were going to be?
Well, a year ago we were talking about how this was a year of dominated by franchise installments, minus Marvel, of course, who only had Deadpool versus Wolverine and the Sony stuff that three of these Spider-Man villain films that they've been trying to build a universe out of with incredibly mixed, mostly zero success. And of course, that was partly, I now realize when looking ahead to the releases for this year, that all the little stuff hadn't been given release dates at that point, so it looked like a more franchise-dominated year than it actually proved to be. But it was the year without a proper MCU film. We got 3 of them again coming out in 2025, including one this week, and so we're kind of back to normal. But it was actually an interestingly skewed year with. Deadpool versus Wolverine was very much its own thing, and it did very well, but it's its own kind of little bubble universe, I think, within the larger synergy between the Fox properties that are now being slopped into the great MCU blob, and it's Fantastic Four that will be the real pivot there.
There was a brief bit of a piece of the Fantastic Four was in Deadpool versus Wolverine, right? For a short time.
Well, the old Fantastic Four, yes. The new Fantastic Four is obviously, a serious reboot, and we've only seen a couple of trailers now, but they're obviously really going for the kind of authentic first generation Kirby look, and then they're going to rip it all up and absorb them into the contemporary contemporary MCU, which will be terribly disappointing. But I mean, it looks gorgeous. So it was a year where the franchises were not the normal franchises, which is where I was going for this. So you mentioned Alien Romulus, which is not a terribly good alien film, but it's a very good space film. It's a film about a space station crashing into a ring system. I'm completely here for that, and it kind of is running out of mythology. I think it had to squeeze in a story at a kind of post alien, pre-aliens point in the continuity that was very stitched together out of situations from other alien films, made very, very deftly put together. I'm glad there's a sequel, and the two leads were amongst the few characters from alien films you would actually like to see again. But so much disposable cast. The alien films are so much about the ensemble, and it was a terrible ensemble. You just want everyone to be killed, apart from the two central characters. And all the best things about it as an alien film were to do with the bits of the alien universe we haven't seen, like life on a Weyland-Yutani mining world, which was, I thought, very brilliantly done. But it was the ring system. It's a ring system film. We haven't seen a proper ring system film in IMAX. That, for me, was what saved it. I mean, of the other franchise items, I mean, well, I was a bit sniffy about it, but they took some quite big swings with the Lord of the Rings anime, the War of the Rohirrim, dealing with the story of Helm Hammerhand from a slightly shifted perspective that makes it not about Helm but about his children, and in particular the daughter, who is not even named in the text and kind of disappears from the narrative. But you can see why it's an interesting space in the appendices to colonize, and
building out. Oh, sorry, no, carry on.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, I'm building out from I forget exactly how many lines, but from not many lines, in that appendix, right?
Yeah, well, this was, I can't remember myself, but this is the one where I was counting the words of the appendix, and the Rings of Power streaming series. I've got to get 5 seasons out of not much more than 1,000 words from two of the appendices. The entire kind of second age only fills about, I forget what it is, about 1,200 words. So at least. Because the thing about the War of the Rohirrim is that it's basically a film that needed to get made to renew the franchise rights for more lucrative live action releases. So it's a film that nobody particularly has their heart in, but farming it out as an anime to a very, very distinguished and gifted anime director, the Napping Princess guy, was quite a bold choice, and the collision between Tolkien and anime creates some really interesting kind of collisions of what you're expecting from each of these very different compartments of fantasy filmmaking. It's not the world's greatest script, but you kind of forgive more in anime, and I was really enjoying it when great classic locations that from the live action versions are recur in a gorgeously designed anime kind of transfer. But the weakness with all the Lord of the Rings films has been the writing team, and this is Philippa Boyens, the one of the the original trio with her daughter and son-in-law. It's still kind of all in the family, and this would not have really passed muster as live action, I think.
Mm-hmm. What about the Planet of the Apes one that came out? Did that get a UK release last year?
It did, yeah. Well, I mean, no, it was. It was actually quite a superior Planet of the Apes film, and it's taken the franchise in quite interesting directions. There's because it's bringing. Is this a spoiler? It's bringing the humans back in, and there is this sort of teaser at the end that there's an entire community of sentient humans who are going to interact with the apes in future installments. I have to say, it's not a film that has stayed in my mind, and I have to cast my mind back a lot to think about what was interesting about it. But it was, it was well made. Because it's obviously launching a new chapter in the franchise. We've got a new cast who are the new ape cast are very good, and I'll be happy to see more of this from that team. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's left much of a fruit. I mean, if you remember, there've been enormous numbers of franchise installments that kind of kept their brands ticking over. We had the Godzilla Kong film, which I've now forgotten almost everything about, but we passed the time quite amiably. We had a not terribly good Inside Out film that again cleaned up at the box office. Was it Pixar's biggest grosser ever? But not really, I think, one of their sort of key entries. I mean, lots interesting about it, because the Inside Out films are a serious attempt to do visual metaphors for what we currently think we understand about universal emotions. And I mean, the whole mythology is getting terribly, terribly top heavy. But the interesting thing about Inside Out 2 is they moved beyond Paul Ekman and his, 8 universal emotions that I think are now regarded as nothing of the kind. And they got a new set of advisors who'd vastly, in line with the current state of understanding, had kind of vastly expanded the repertoire. But then they do this rather odd kind of selection with them, in which, as is reflects, I think, the kind of Hollywood take on almost everything. That anxiety is the central new character, because that's the emotion that you're dominated by if you're working on a Pixar film. And I'm not sure that really is the direction in which I would wish to take demotic understanding of emotion studies. But all credit to them for trying. It is one of the films which takes its advisor, or one of the franchises which takes its expert advisors seriously, and then kind of throws away 3/4 of what they, well, probably 9/10 of what they advise, but that's probably 10% more than most films. I'm just, I mean, there was a quite.
Oh, and Inside Out also. It's a sort of span off into a TV series, right?
That's right. Yeah, I haven't watched that one yet, but but again, they're dealing with one of my favourite research areas, dreams, and I've been kind of nervous of watching it because I have an awful feeling this is going to this is not going to be availing itself of the best advice on what we know about dreaming. But I'll have to say, I should redeem my Disney Plus and have a little look at it. I'm sure there's lots of interesting thought going on there. I'm just looking through the list of other things we had an installment of.
I wanted to ask you about A Quiet Place Day One. I was kind of curious about that because I haven't heard much about it, and also because I kind of wonder if it was it kind of seems kind of unnecessary on one level. I mean, lots of these films kind of maybe are unnecessary because I wonder if like part of A Quiet Place is that we don't really know what went on, and so kind of going back and filling in that gap seems an interesting choice. But I haven't seen it, so I don't know. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that one.
Well, the thing about that film is that it's an absolutely brilliant film about a terminal cancer patient, magnificently played by Lupita Nyong'o, who's never been better, and what it feels like to be dying young and to be a vibrant, angry person whose body is slowly packing in, which then regrettably turns into A Quiet Place film.
Okay.
And you would much rather watch the film about this character who, and it would have cost $5 million and played on small screens in sort of 20 cinemas worldwide, and would have been remembered for a great setup and a great central performance. And instead, the reason it got made is because they needed another installment in the Quiet Place franchise, and the original cast have kind of run out of steam, and so they needed to go somewhere else. And the obvious place to go is prequel, because that was the bit of the mythology that hadn't been explored. So yes, I mean it does. They remove some of the mystery, but then the thing about the Quiet Place monsters is that they were never terribly interesting for the things you didn't know about them. They're obviously they're aliens that have this particular metabolism and life cycle, which is actually quite interestingly developed in the prequel. But they are. This is not a franchise that loses much for showing you a little bit of how the event, the apocalypse, gets started. It passes the time. The Joseph Quinn character is a bit preposterous, but it does do kind of apocalyptic New York in a way that is always worth seeing. I mean, it's been very great. If there's a theme to 2024 generally, it's the sheer number of apocalypse films.
Right.
And they're very, very grounded apocalypses in the sense that you can see how this is. There are a lot of ideas about how it could go absolutely tits up right now, right here, and you can't blame them in all kinds of ways.
Okay, I think. Yeah, I think that's all of that's all the things I can think of at the moment. The only other one that I have open here, but I don't know if it got a cinematic release, is Rebel Moon. But I feel like that.
Yeah, that of course was the big kind of streaming premiere. A showcase, the ultimate Netflix franchise, really, in that they throw insane amounts of money at a once bankable filmmaker with relatively little quality control, and every now and again it pays off. Most of the time it produces something uh, flabby and um, disposable and forgettable. And Zack Snyder was someone who has, he's always been a bit of a divisive figure as a filmmaker. He's got this fantastic kind of visual sense and passion for really balls out spectacle, but he's also not the world's greatest narrative and world building filmmaker, and so Rebel Moon belongs in this weird kind of Netflix space where people will put up with stuff on streaming that they would probably wouldn't in the in the cinemas. But I mean, I thought the extreme example of that was actually not Rebel Moon, but Red One, the Netflix Christmas film, which did get theatrical releases, and God, it looked great in the trailers, but blown up to IMAX size, it's just unwatchable. I mean, it's so ugly and so stupid, and the world building is so kind of desperately messy that it's just astonishing, really, that it got there. Yeah, it did fairly well, but that was the most Netflix film of the year, I thought.
To the awards season, what's sort of made it through, sort of, genre wise, and what do you think should have but hasn't? And I think maybe we can use this to sort of think about screenplays as well.
Well, the award season is always, it's never a great time for genre films, although in recent years there's been a bit more tolerance, and it was very it's been very good to see Shape of Water, of course, took Best Picture, which was a great result. And one of the categories that has always been quite genre friendly has been the screenplay, particularly the original screenplay category. And my favorite thing about awards season has always been that it's the time of year when the studios, it starts in the autumn, the time of year when the studios release screenplays that they want to push for nominations, and they kind of stay around until the ceremonies. So it used to be, a decade or so ago, it used to be quite easy to find screenplays, sometimes for upcoming films, distributed quite widely on the web, and the studios really cracked down on that. And so it really is only this time of year where unless you're part of a kind of file sharing community of screenwriter wannabes, you can actually read some of these films as they were originally written without having to kind of put in a lot of legwork.
And what are the best places for people to find those?
Well, they're now fairly well. The Deadline always tries to collect them. They've got what they call a story on their website, which is just I think a tag basically called Read the Screenplay. But Simply Scripts is a very long-standing repository with a lot of broken links, but that's where they try and collect all links to all screenplays available online, and that's probably the place to go at this time of year. So thinking back over what's available. I mean, in terms of what's actually going to the Oscars, The Substance is the only one that's been that's made the final cut, and predictably, some of the other really great scripts and films of the year were given an initial push, and you can read them online, but didn't make it. So things like I saw the TV Glow, which is, I think, an incredible piece of writing, as well as an absolutely stellar piece of filmmaking. That's one which predictably didn't make the cut, but should have, because I mean it's just amazing. Amongst others that you can find online, Nosferatu, which I think is a more, I mean, actually loses something as a screenplay. I didn't really want to know that Robert Eggers actually writes slug lines with exclamation marks in them. That seems like to diminish his brand. You know, that's the kind of thing that Disney does. But yeah, that's there if you're interested. Civil War, of course. Dune Part 2. If you want to read Deadpool versus Wolverine or Inside Out 2, they're up there. One that I Transformers 1, Moana 2, probably the worst sequel of the year. Wicked is there, Night Bitch is there. Night Bitch is an interesting one because I really like the novel. I didn't think I would like the novel, and if you watch the film, you think you're going to hate the novel, but actually the novel is really good, and the film is. And the screenplay is necessarily a rather polite, tidied up version of what is a much kind of toothier original. Wild Robot is there, The Substance, of course. Blink Twice you can read. One that reads very well, particularly compared with other animations, is the Wallace and Gromit script. So much more British, restrained, deadpan, no exclamation marks, doesn't need them. And do you appreciate the kind of tightness of the writing on that in a way that I think the more studio honed things don't really display. Red One you can read if you want to. I mean, it's absolutely enormous. If you think it feels flabby on the screen, wait till you read all. I forget what it is. 160 pages of screenplay. I mean, it's just.
Oh wow.
That can't be right. No, it's 127. It just feels like 160. But there was some interesting stuff in this year's scripts. You start to see screenplay form being used in more adventurous ways. So the script for Heretic, which I think plays on screen better than it plays as text, is doing some really interesting things with the format. Even whatever you think of it as a script, it's got a bibliography. It's got graphics to kind of illustrate how sometimes to illustrate how things should look, but sometimes really just to kind of extend the mood. The Substance is doing very interesting things with kind of typology and typography and ASCII art even at one point. It's kind of breaking some of the rules, as well as being a fantastically forceful piece of writing. So it's always worth checking these out. There's probably a lot of stuff that wouldn't be worth seeing in the cinema, but is worth reading in script form. So I've only been talking about the kind of SF stuff, but there's absolutely tons of these things you can look at if you were thinking of checking out The Brutalist, but you don't want to sit through 3 hours of film. This is your chance to get a sense of what it was like, and often you can get a better sense of what it's like from the screenplay than from the finished film, which is a thing you can probably only say on an Interzone podcast. People who actually believe that the written word is the primary engine of all narrative, and that cinema, despite being the dominant art form of our times and so kind of visceral and immersive and spellbinding, is in some ways always secondary.
You mentioned I saw the TV Glow. What was it about that one in particular which sort of stuck in your mind?
As a screenplay, I mean,
as a screenplay.
It's often it's in the way that the action descriptions, because obviously, most screenplay step back. Most screenplay awards are not given to the screenplay. They're given to the voters' experience of the film as a written object, and they're kind of inferring the screenplay. So I think The Substance won Best Screenplay at Cannes. Am I remembering that right? And I can't believe anyone had seen the script at that point, although the script is an absolutely amazing script and well worth checking out for all kinds of reasons we may actually get a chance to talk about more fully later. But it's certainly an incredible piece of screenplay art, using the form in really powerful ways that are clearly the product of a writer-director who knows what they want this to look like on screen. But it is its own thing as a screenplay. But most of the time, we think of a screenplay as a kind of blueprint for a film, and when they're awarded prizes at Cannes, they're being actually kind of retro-constructed from the experience of the finished film, which means primarily it's being awarded to the plot and the dialogue. And what that loses is the writing that does not appear directly on screen. That's usually a kind of directorial vision of what you want the scene to do, and that's usually in the action slugs. It's in the action description, which of course is substituted by full cinematic realization when you see it on film. And so if the screenwriter has a distinctive voice, that's often where the stuff that is distinctive about the screenplay is to be found. And I saw the TV Glow. I mean, well, the thing about the film is that one of the many things about the film is that make it unlike anything else you've ever seen, is the central character who Justice Smith plays from the age of, I can't remember when he takes over from the younger actor who's cast, but certainly from a teenager into middle age. And it's an incredible performance, and I think he's one of the most thrilling actors you could watch. My family are completely obsessed with him. We will watch the American Society of Magical Negroes over and over again just to see what he does. But what's great about the screenplay is that it has to kind of imagine what we're going to see from this performance in text alone, and it is utterly brilliantly done. The final pages of the screenplay, if anything, are even more impactful than the final sequence of the film, which is absolutely heartbreaking and kind of devastating. And the screenplay has more. I mean, just to as a hook for anyone who loves that film, the screenplay spends more time in the world of the imaginary TV show than you see on screen. So if, as I think anyone who watches that film would want, if you just want to spend more time in this kind of partly glimpsed world of this TV series, which may or may not actually be the real world, then you need to read the screenplay anyway, just to have that experience. I don't know if there'll be deleted scenes. I don't know if they filmed some of the stuff that's in the script but not on the film. But that's where you want to spend the rest of your life, really, in that series. So that was great. And the other one that really stands out is The Substance, which again has that same thing of having a very distinctive voice in the narration. The thing about the Substance that I think I only really appreciated from the screenplay is just how complex the interaction between the two the two kind of avatars, if you like, of the central character is, and what happens each time they swap over, and how much experience is shared between them. And you really have to go back. I don't think it's work going back through the film. You actually really have to kind of get the screenplay out and look at all the moments where there's a handover and what's going on at that point, in terms of continuity of consciousness and memory, to understand the toxic relationship that builds between the host, as it were, the matrix, as she's called, the Demi Moore version, and the other self, and why it goes in the direction that it eventually does.
Has the screenplay for I Saw the TV Globe been nominated for anything, or has it?
Well, good question. I mean, we'd have to. I mean, it's probably been. I mean, it should be nominated for everything in sight, but it hasn't been nominated for any of the major awards. I mean, it is a very niche film. You know, it's a film. It's a very subcultural film in a lot of ways. It tends to. It's had most of its really passionate following from trans and queer communities and from kind of fan type communities, even though, I think this is a film that will be remembered for a very long time, and it's it is one of these kind of instant classics. When you see it the first time, you think this is an absolute landmark piece of filmmaking. But I don't think it's really caught on with the Oscar voting community. Even though, I mean, the thing about screenplays is that the screenwriting categories, because they're mainly voted for by the writers, tend to be more willing to recognize really ambitious, often kind of genre writing than the more mainstream categories. So it's no coincidence that it's tended to be in the screenplay categories that SF films have done best in over the years. Things like Eternal Sunshine, truly great films. I mean, among the greatest films of the millennium. They're the ones that have tended to be recognised in the writing categories where they haven't broken through in the directorial and the sort of best film categories that they should also have won, frankly.
And just you mentioned before that it's 40 years of Mutant Popcorn, and sort of when you think back about the films you've reviewed and the screenplays for those films, are there particular screenplays? You mentioned Her. I know you've talked about Her before being a kind of an amazing screenplay, but yeah, are there any others or any screenplays that you think, for someone who's maybe who hasn't read a lot of film screenplays, who if they went to that particular one, they would like open their eyes?
Well, it's I mean, there are two, possibly more than two, but what immediately come to mind are two different kinds of screenplay that really set me on fire. Some of them are just films that work. Open parentheses. There's a bit in Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle was part of a generation that was growing up with the fact that Greek tragedy was something you could read as well as see. And he says, there's a famous line where he says that a really good tragedy should have the exact same effect if you read it as if you watch it in a theatre with an audience and have the whole kind of immersive experience. And it's the same for screenplays. Sometimes a film is so perfectly written that you can get a kind of distilled version of the experience, because you can read the screenplay in half an hour, whereas it'll take you 2 hours to watch the film, and you get this kind of really intensified experience of this kind of narrative armature without all the kind of pauses for waiting for things to happen. And so the guy who is an absolute master of that has always been, well, there are two guys, but in the genre, the other guy is Tarantino, but the guy who has been a master of it in the genre is Cameron. And Cameron's writing has a kind of crackle and an energy about it, which is only compounded by the fact that he is so impatient. I mean, he hated all his life. He's hated finishing screenplays. He invented a form which has now become standard in the industry called a scriptment, which is basically a kind of adrenaline-fueled splurge draft where you just write your way through the story with fragments of dialogue, but a lot of it is just kind of narrative distillation of the film. And so many of his great screenplays, whether made or unmade, his Spider-Man draft, which you can still see quite a lot of in the first Raimi Spider-Man film, even though they changed the villains and a lot of the shape of the film went in a different direction. His original script for Avatar, his draft of Strange Days, they were always absolutely thrilling reads in ways that sometimes the finished film just couldn't quite live up to. So the original draft of Avatar, I think, was in many ways a more interesting or a more thrilling experience than the first Avatar film. Same actually with the Spider-Man film. So there's that kind of thing. But there's also films where the draft preserves things that didn't quite make it into the finished film, which preserves some of the vision, some of the material that was cut back often for running time reasons, and there, something like. I suppose Cloud Atlas would be an example. Massive, that I think was 180 pages originally. One of the most ambitious pieces of adaptation ever. A completely unfilmable novel, which became a film which not everybody, I think, loves to the same degree, but I think was an amazing undertaking as a piece of writing, and then also as a kind of cut down version of what they originally wrote. And I suppose if I was going to come up with a third category, with films that never get made at all.
Right.
So sometimes all you're left with, there are SF films that would have been amongst the greatest films ever made that for all kinds of reasons just could not get the budget. And I don't think there's a script for Jodorowsky's Dune out there, but there are Shane Carruth scripts, his great unmade IMAX film Autopiary, which I think is probably the single most extraordinary science fiction screenplay ever written. Mm-hmm. Again, doing things with the form that really kind of break the form itself and take it to completely other places. His final the film that was going, the non-SF film that was going to be his great kind of studio project, A Modern Ocean. That's an amazing read as well. There's a lot of good stuff out there. I've always been very fond of Richard Kelly's early script Bessie from kind of Donnie Darko days, which is basically Poor Things but present day, and she's a cow, genetically engineered mutant cow with psi powers.
Wow,
that's a stunner. So there's a whole rabbit hole to tumble down head first if you if you're curious.
And that website you mentioned before, where the one with the lots of dead links but also lots of good links, is
simplyscripts.com.
Simplyscripts.com. Okay, and you can find a lot of these there, or and even if they're not, even with dead links, I guess they might be on They might be archived somewhere, right?
Yes. I mean, it's. I think everything I've mentioned is probably just a web search away. There's much more that kind of circulates in Samizdat. Through chats and groups and discords, and I don't know that world at all. I used to live partly in it, but it's mainly populated by wannabe screenwriters, and of course that's exactly what I'm not interested in. I'm interested in being a consumer, a reader, fan. And the screenplay theory only took off only about 10 years ago, really, as a kind of academic discipline, as a body of study. And it still, I think, hasn't really, I mean, I think it may just be me, but it hasn't really caught up with the experience of people who just like reading this stuff for the experience of reading it, who are just fans of cinema and of narrative and of really great storytelling, and want to read this stuff as Interzone people would read it, as another medium for doing science fiction. And the great thing about the screenplay, I think, which is never really given credit for, is that it's where most of the thinking about narrative is kind of happening with the resources and the pressures and the kind of institutional field testing and stress testing. Screenwriting is a kind of laboratory for really thought through storytelling, and all of these the entire kind of industry of Hollywood screenwriting is basically a kind of vast crowdsourced product or experiment in narrative poetics, trying to sort of figure out what kind of story is worth investing hundreds of millions of dollars in putting before an audience with the expectation of getting a profit. And sometimes it's a race to the bottom. Sometimes it results in very kind of by numbers screenwriting to formula. But sometimes it produces something wildly original and unexpected that changes the way we do storytelling ever since, ever after.
Whew, lots to think about there. Have you spent much time with screenplays for David Lynch's films?
Well, yeah.
And are there any of those that kind of jump out?
Interesting question. I don't know. Most of the Lynch screenplays, I think all the Lynch screenplays I've read have been for unmade works like Ronnie Rocket, One Saliva Bubble. You can find the screenplays for those online. A lot of Lynch is not really scripted in the usual kind of way, and so something like Inland Empire, for example, which I think is my favorite Lynch, is I'm not even sure there is a finished screenplay. I could be wrong. You know what? I'm going to type this into Simply Scripts right now and see what we've got under Lynch. You can hear my keyboard going right on there. Let's
full immersion.
Yeah. This is we're doing this live. So okay, let's have a look and see if they have. I'm sure Twin Peaks scripts are up there because they do exist as proper scripts.
As I asked the question, I was thinking that I really want to now look at some of those because I'm sure there's something fascinating in all of them.
I can tell you that, that Inland Empire does not seem to have a script online. But, the Lynch, of course, had a whole library of passion projects that he carried with him in some cases over decades, and which simply weren't able to, because they tended to be deeply, deeply weird. And they were never completely abandoned, although I think in his last years, things like Ronnie Rocket were not really kind of going projects. But he was massively prolific in all kinds of media, and some of his never-made features had, because obviously, there's an enormous kind of fan base around Lynch, and so they were the kinds of things that tended to leak out, whether or not he had any kind of control over it. I'm just going to have a little. I'm just seeing if there's a. I don't know why I'm going with Inland Empire. It's the least, because it's the least likely to have a script, actually. There's a transcript. That's the thing you can sometimes find. I mean, they're not the same experience at all. But if you just want to relive the dialogue from a film, there are transcript sites like Scraps from the Loft is one, which just host. I'm not quite sure how they're produced actually, but they just host dialogue transcripts. Without this is actually what Aristotle's encounters with the scripts of Greek tragedy would be like. It doesn't tell you who the speakers are. You've just got all the lines of dialogue in order. And you have to kind of make of it what you will. So there's quite a lot of those online, but they're not the same experience as an actual screenplay. But Lynch often didn't work from a finished screenplay. His Dune scripts are up there. You can read his various drafts of Dune because that was very much a studio production with a lot of kind of formal drafts and very, very interesting development history because he was very, very serious about the novel and really worked closely with Herbert and had enormous respect for the material and tried to and worked it over and over in all kinds of really thoughtful ways that don't really show up in the finished film because so much was cut.
Thank you for all that. Let's looking at 2025 at what's kind of on the way. As you mentioned earlier, there's a lot which doesn't have a release date yet, but is there anything on your radar already? Anything you?
Well, there's stuff that is going to, even within the studio franchise stuff, which is stuff that tends to be in the calendar years in advance. It's an Avatar year. That's going to be that's something to look forward to in December. Something that already has a date that I think all of us have been excited about for a while is Lanthimos's Bugonia, which that's not I think till November, but I expect will be starting to leak out in festivals earlier in the year, and that's his adaptation. God knows how this is going to work. This is his version of his remake of the mad Korean film Save the Green Planet, but proper SF film. One of the things I'm curious about is what the title refers to, because I'm not sure how widely this known is outside the world of classics, but Bugonia is, as fans of Virgil's Georgics will know, is a kind of cryptobiological process under which you can generate life from dead matter. The classic example is the belief in antiquity that bees could spontaneously generate from the carcass of a rotting cow, and so Bugonia means generation from cows. It's life out of dead matter, and I have no idea how that's going to fit with the. If anyone's seen the original film, it's not at all clear how this kind of squares with that. But it'll be so that will certainly be one to look out for. I'm probably the only person in the world that is excited by a new Paul W.S. Anderson film from a George R.R. Martin story. Anderson, who is still one of my favorite filmmakers, he's very written off, but he's got an adaptation of Martin's In the Lost Lands coming out in a few weeks, and it will probably be another of his failed franchise starters, like the Monster Hunter film from a couple of years ago. But he's such an interesting action filmmaker, and I think was one of the very few directors who was a serious gamer, and that's why the Resident Evil films, I think, are amongst the only game franchises ever to get in. Actually, on the subject of Anderson's franchise, we've got a sequel to Mortal Kombat, the reboot, coming up as well, amongst the other franchise numbers on the way. But there's other stuff that's been anticipated for a while. We've got, again, coming up quite soon now, we've got Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17, which is the kind of the comedy version of Rogue Moon. I'm not sure how that's going to play out. A film I still haven't seen, although you can read the screenplay online. I missed it at the London Film Festival, which was, as usual, was too packed with genre stuff to see everything, and I thought it would be out sooner than it was. But Flow, the great Baltic animation, which has, it's I don't know how much to say without being a spoiler, but it's about animals surviving in a post-apocalyptic flood, and there is one sequence in it which is almost Lynchian, I think, in its strangeness and science fictionality. And there are even in the kind of studio franchise stuff, there's some really interesting properties coming up. Gareth Edwards is doing his Jurassic World installment with a new chapter, new cast, return to Isla Nublar to judge from the trailer. And
with the original screenwriter, or am I misremembering?
I can't remember who's the writer on that one. Well, it won't be the original screenwriter, because the original screenwriter. Well, actually, is it David Koepp again? It could be.
I think it's Koepp. I think I noticed because you mentioned the Soderbergh. The two Soderbergh films.
Yeah, he's hooked up with Soderbergh, and they're just churning stuff out. But he's certainly a busy man at the moment, is Cope. And you could be right; it could be him again. I mean, when you said the original screenplay, I was thinking Michael Crichton. I think he's been. He's been less prolific since he died, although still getting more credits probably posthumously than he had in life. But but Edwards, one of the great spectacle filmmakers of our age, doing the great spectacle franchise of our age. We've of course got James Gunn's Superman coming out. Lots of weight of expectation around that. Could be great, could be not so great, but a really important moment in the rather unhappy DC. It's got a different acronym now, hasn't it? I think it's only 3 letters now. Is it the DCU now? It's no longer the DCEU. We're in a new universe. There's a lot of Marvel stuff coming up. The Fantastic Four film looks incredibly stylish, and they Kirby inspired 60s setting looks absolutely joyous. Whether they will be able to break the mold of the Marvel third act, but at least it's Fantastic Four and Galactus. I literally have an original copy of the Coming of Galactus issue sitting on my mantelpiece, because it was a good present from my students when I raved about it a few years ago as one of the sort of defining comics issues of my childhood. And so that will at least be one to look out for. And there's further installments in. I'm just looking at my list now. All these bloody Disney live action films. We've got the live action Snow White, the live action Lilo and Stitch. But there's a new Tron film. There's a new Zootopia film. We've got 28 years later, the new trilogy starting up in June. We've got the final Mission Impossible. We've got the Megan sequel, Freakier Friday, new Predator film, Running Man reboot, Wicked sequel. What have I missed? Minecraft franchise launcher. So a lot of these could be doing interesting things with their their brand. Of course, the thing that I'm in a way most irrelevantly excited for is is this sort of weird a surge of films of the Odyssey. So I don't know if this is on anyone else's radar, but I was having dinner last night with a bunch of classicists, and we were talking yet again about the Umberto Pasolini film The Return. No relation to more famous Pasolinis, at least no known relation, but this is the film of the second half of the Odyssey, the best bit of the Odyssey, that has been in the works for 30 years. Literally has taken 30 years to get to the screen. Edward Bond, who did a script polish in the 90s, still has a screenplay credit, even though he died last March and hadn't done any screenwriting for decades. Never lived to see the finished film, as far as I know. But then at the moment it's released, all the oxygen is sucked out of its... it was released in the States in December. All the oxygen is sucked out of its brand by the fact that bloody Nolan decides he's going to do the Odyssey with this all-star cast arriving in 2026 and in the Nolan summer IMAX kill all the business for all other films that week slot, unless they're Barbie. So that's going to be an interesting time, because ultimately all science fiction films are the Odyssey, as I have a forthcoming book trying to explain. And we will be kind of going back to roots multiple times over. Not only all science fiction films, but all films, actually.
All films. Is that the argument in the book?
Oh, I've already. No, I argued that in my first. That was my argument in my first book. We've got this particular kind of ending, which is a unique feature of the Western literary tradition. There's a famous book by Earl Miner called Comparative Poetics, which makes the point that, it actually makes a slightly different point about how Western poetics is founded on drama, whereas all the great Asian literatures have a poetics founded on lyric. But it's ultimately due to a kind of obsession with the Odyssey, and particularly with the back end of the Odyssey, as a particular kind of plotting which gives closure. And closure is a Western fetish, the idea that things have to meet in a single happy ever after ending, where the hero defeats the antagonist, which is again a very Western thing, in the face of overwhelming odds. In the case of the Odyssey, one guy against 108, in a physical finish on one big soundstage in a single location, as a result of which he gets the girl and they live happily ever after, and nothing else ever happens in the world, because that's a sort of complete ending. And the Odyssey is about the end of the heroic age and being the end of Greek myth, and so there is no space for another story to finish it. But because of the way this kind of got fetishized, and it's particularly some of its plot devices got fetishized in Greek tragedy, which was desperate for a way of having stories that finished within the kind of continuum of myth, it sort of got into the bloodstream of Western storytelling. And because of the way that the well-made play and highly plotted drama were fetishized in 19th century theatre at the moment when the grammar of popular cinema narrative was being invented, it's become the bedrock of film, and that's why they're all basically the Odyssey. All popular studio cinema has this particular pattern of ending, where you have a location where everyone fights it all out, and the hero triumphs and gets the girl, and they live happily ever after. But that's just like happens all the time in life. But but actually, there's a second story to be told about how actually it's also the basis of how we do fantasy fiction, and that's a different part of the Odyssey. And but the fact that it's framed within this this larger narrative poetics is also kind of important. I'm not the first person to tell this story. I think I'm the first classicist to try and tell it in a systematic kind of way. But everyone's always saying, of course, we get all our tropes of SF from the Odyssey, but I'm not sure it's fully understood why. So that's an upcoming attraction for probably 2026, I think.
Yeah. And have you seen The Return? Is it? I don't. No. It hasn't. Mm.
No, I haven't. No, there's quite a lot of it online now. If you go to IMDb and click on, nobody ever does this, but if you click on the plot keywords link, which I will just do and read it out for you, actually, because I need to read this off the screen to you. So. Okay, so if you're listening at home, scroll down to storyline, and you will see 5. These are what IMDb calls plot keywords, and the ones you can see are male nudity, male frontal nudity, male pubic hair, male full frontal nudity, and bare-chested male. But then it says 53 more. And if you click on that, you'll get shaved chest, female topless nudity, female nudity, pubic hair, and then as you go down, you get things like washed ashore and washing ashore, which both happen in the same book of the Odyssey, but are completely separate things. Woman on top sex, dog, that'll be the famous dog scene in book 17, washing blood off someone's body, full frontal nudity, post-traumatic stress disorder, stabbed to death, killed with an arrow, throat slit, and the very last one, hairy-chested male. So
wow, okay,
it feels like you could play a game of can you identify the film from the plot keywords? I've never done this for any other film, so it might not be like that. But I don't know what fuels this. I don't know whether this is kind of crowdsourced from searches, but at any rate, this apparently is what the world is expecting from a film of Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche reunited. It's like here, reunites the team from Forrest Gump. The Return reunite our old friends from The English Patient. But it's had mixed reviews. I'm not sure it's actually going to be all that. I don't think there are any fantasy elements in this one. I'm sure there will be in the Nolan.
In the Nolan version, yeah, that's an amazing list of plot keywords.
Yeah.
You mentioned Nolan, and it jogged my memory because earlier on, you were talking about Zelna, or you were talking about a Zelna film about Sasquatch sunset, sunrise, sunset,
yeah. Sunset, yes. No, the whole point of the Sunset, it's an extinction film. It's another apocalypse film. It's about being the last of your kind.
I think I don't know if he's there, or if it's just Nathan Fielder, but I saw that he was directing The Curse, which I've seen parts of, and which is kind of really fascinating.
Oh.
And Nolan did a really interesting Q&A with Fielder, which is on YouTube. So if you kind of Google Nolan, Nathan Fielder, and The Curse, and then there's a really interesting talk about that. And you were talking about narrative and closure, and just interesting kind of treatments of kind of sort of fantasy elements and storytelling. And I think that The Curse is, it's super interesting that The Curse is the Curse even got made, and also that Nolan kind of took an interest in being a kind of a really engaged interviewer with the people who made it. So yeah, that was quite cool to watch.
I mean, while his name is there in the mix, I mean, I didn't mention him at all when we were talking about screenplays. But of course, Nolan's screenplays are always something. He is the master of non-linear writing. If anyone, if there are Nolan fans out there who just want an extra dose of him, there's an unmade screenplay which is an adaptation of Ruth Rendell's novel The Keys to the Street, which has a fantastic twist in it, which has been Nolanized in a very clever way. It's a crime novel. It's not a fantasy thing, and I don't think it will ever be made. Gemma Arterton was attached to it for many years, and I think it's kind of, but it's early Nolan screenwriting from early in his career, and is a really terrific screenplay. It's whether or not you know the novel, probably better if you don't know the novel actually, because you then encounter it in a shown rather than told kind of way. But Nolan's screenplays for Inception in particular, The Prestige, which I think is still his best film. These are phenomenal pieces of Oppenheimer, famously, of course, which I think you did read this time last year, has that famous device of writing it in two different persons. So he's someone who's experimenting with the form in really striking ways, and it all gets rather eclipsed by the fact that the finished film has all these other filmmaking skills that he's throwing at it. But he is a really, really interesting writer amongst everything else.
Thank you so much again, Nick. Thanks for coming back on. This has been a really, really fascinating conversation. I'm looking forward to the next.
No, me too. There's some great stuff already in hand for the next issue, and it'll be great to talk about it when we get the chance.
You've been listening to Interzone Pod with me, Gareth Jelly, and my guest today, Nick Lowe. Thanks very much for listening. See you next time.